There you go.
The memory of things past. There you go.
Yeah, keep me positive about our moisture.
Yeah. Yeah. I read your memo the other day about in the Sentinel, and I didn't realize that we were in that bad a shape moisture wise.
Yeah, unfortunately we are. And it's, we always have the chance for a bunch of moisture this spring. And 2002, 2003 winter, we were in a very similar situation, and then we got a 5-foot snowstorm, and that solved the problem for that year.
Yeah.
So as much as I don't like shoveling 5 feet of snow, I would welcome it.
Well, I'll bring my mini track down there, and we'll get you out real quick.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, there's Sean. Morning, Sean. Or afternoon. There's Patty.
Hi.
Hi. How y'all
Tom,
doing?
you're muted.
Yes, thank you.
I was like,
I realized that when I'm like, wait a minute. No, I was going to say Zoom's actually making it a lot easier for me to get into these meetings because they're always during the day, right? So that's harder for me to jet out of the office, but when I can just join on the computer, that makes it a lot easier. So cool.
Patty, this is Kurt. You said that somebody else from DLC was going to be joining us?
Yeah, Melinda Beck is online with us. She's DLC's attorney.
Yes, ma'am. Perfect. So, Randy, we're at 1:03 almost, and got 3 board members. You get yourself and Craig and Sean. I don't know if you can see everybody else that's on, but Patty's on as well, and so is Melinda Black from the DLC.
Oh, sounds good. We can get rolling, sir.
Okay. The floor is yours, sir. So just so everybody knows, we haven't met, the board hasn't met with the DLC folks in several months. And so the idea of this is just for the board members to have some conversation with Patty and DLC staff, and just so you can touch base and let everybody know where everything is at and what plans are for the future. And then also there was a recent issue that came up, and so we decided to set up a quick little Zoom call to discuss that and anything else that you want to discuss regarding the Gateway Conservation Easement.
Yeah, that sounds real good. And I guess I would extend to Patty and the Land Conservancy that, let's not wait for an issue to come up to have conversations. I think it would be good for the Perry Park Metropolitan District Board and the Douglas Land Conservancy Board to have, at the very least, an annual or possibly a semi-annual touch base and just see what's going on with not only the properties that we have, but what's going on in your world, and see if there's any cool ideas out there that we can maybe integrate into our management practices.
Sure, we're always happy to meet and have any, a Q&A session, answer any questions about conservation easements, not only the Gateway property, but the Big D Meadow, which we hold a conservation easement on as well. So I'm happy to do that anytime, if you want to do it on an annual basis or as necessary is fine. We're open to that.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, really appreciate that. Well, I guess I'll throw it out there. A topic of the day with the little parking area and the commercial use out there with what was it, the Little Peacock coffee shop thing. Craig, I think I'll hand it over to you on that. You kind of got the brunt of social media comments and stuff like that. I don't play in that world, so I wasn't really aware of all the things that were going on. So if you'd like to maybe lead off with some comments, sir.
Yeah, there had been expressed that, well, I guess how this really started was that Joe had gone down and had coffee at the Little Peacock down in Larkspur, and it kind of came up that they were having a hard time struggling down there. They weren't getting the traffic that they thought they should. There had been some comments on Facebook and Nextdoor and so forth that it sure would be nice if we had the Little Peacock out here once in a while to get coffee and donuts and so forth. And so Joe said, apparently was talking to them that morning that he went down to get coffee. And it was brought up that maybe they could come out here to Perry Park. And because there seemed to be some interest out here of having them come out occasionally. And so I guess it was just convenient. I mean, there's been so much commercial traffic up there in that front park that before that I guess we just kind of thought, well, okay, let's just have it up there and close to the entrance. They could grab some of the traffic off of 105 and so forth, and that type of thing. So didn't even think that the parking lot was a problem because we have the fire department auxiliary up there collecting goods. We have Girl Scouts that have sold cookies up there. We've had, let's see, the where they grind up the paper and so forth. That was up there. We have numerous trucks, commercial trucks that stop in there all the time. And that parking lot just has become, a place for gathering in my opinion. So that's how that came up. So I guess what we need to find out is if we are going to keep all commercial out of that property, then we're almost going to have to put a sheriff's deputy up there all the time. I know I've called the sheriff myself 3 or 4 times on commercial trucks, 18-wheelers, that type of thing, trucks that sat overnight. But yeah, it's going to require quite a bit of governing if we can have commercial up there at some point.
Well, I guess to maybe put a little finer point on the question, I think what would be good feedback, Patty, in particular, is what constitutes, in your view, commercial activity versus not? Because when you look at the easement agreement, it simply just says commercial activity. Right? There's not really a whole lot of definition in there. So I think will be helpful is to understand your viewpoint on that definition, what falls into that definition of commercial activity from your viewpoint, the DLC's viewpoint.
Sure. I'll let Melinda talk about that because we do run into the situation with the majority of our conservation easements that don't allow commercial uses. And so we do discuss definition of commercial uses quite a bit. And so Melinda, I'll let you chime in on that.
Sure. So unfortunately, commercial uses is very broadly construed because we don't have any language that suggests it can be construed narrowly. And so, some of these older easements contain these provisions that say no commercial or industrial uses. And it's essentially means anything that's used for commerce or for making money is going to be prohibited. So I would say to the extent you have fire truck collecting donations, that's not commercial because it's obviously a charitable purpose, which would be in line, wouldn't violate the easement. Unless there's some other part of that use that would violate some other part of the provision of the easement. But in terms of the commercial uses, if you've got charitable contributions coming in and Girl Scout, that kind of thing, that wouldn't be considered commercial use. Now, I don't know if the Girl Scouts are selling cookies.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're a
Yep.
nonprofit. I don't know if they're a nonprofit, if Girl Scouts of America is a nonprofit or not. You have to look into it. But that's literally how specific it can get. And so Douglas Land Conservancy now and later easements, we have a less restrictive provision, but in these earlier easements, it's very restrictive. So unfortunately, that's not something that we have the ability to just turn a blind eye to, typically, even though it seems silly. If the activity is the same, then what would it matter whether someone's making money or not? I mean, we understand that completely, but because the easement is so specific, we're left with having to abide by its terms.
Right. Okay. And then and in that easement, there's also another clause, which is where we can agree on amending that easement between the DLC and the Metro District. I'm not offering we do. I'm just saying that you're referencing that there might be newer language that might fit this better.
So we have the ability to amend the easement, but in this case, it has to be approved by Colorado Parks and Wildlife also.
That's right. That's in there. Thank you.
Yeah. And I don't know if the county also has to approve.
I think it was just Division of Wildlife is what I saw, if I remember.
So that's, and then we also have an amendment policy that we have to comply with. And so the basic standards of whether we can amend an easement come down to whether there's there can't be a negative impact on the conservation values. So that's primary standard we have to live by.
Okay.
There are times when that parking lot has 10 cars in it. And mainly, from what I've seen, a lot of them are going to be commercial vehicles that are doing business because it's one of the few places that you can get a telephone signal. And so they pull off into the parking lot and, make their phone call and everything. I've seen UPS, I've seen FedEx, I've seen moving trucks, I've seen construction vehicles there. It's, what damage is that parking lot? I mean, it's there already, and it was there when this was all written up. So what damage is it doing to any of the values that of the wildlife and so forth in the area? It's been there forever, so.
Well, I think if people are parking in the parking lot and the parking lot's been there, then there's no difference between this, what we look at and where the conservation easement monitoring and evaluation is what was occurring at the time the conservation easement was granted and what's occurring now.
Yeah.
If there's a difference between people parking in that parking lot before versus people parking in that parking lot now, then there wouldn't be a difference that could rise to any kind of level of a violation. So I don't think people parking in the parking lot is a problem. I think if people are driving off the parking lot and onto the land, the natural area and parking, that's an issue. But if people are just parking in the parking lot, I think that's, Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know more about the history, but I think that's no different than the situation when the property was put under easement.
Right, there's no different that way. And, it is hard to control whether somebody is on their phone doing business or not. But, essentially they're parking just the same as they were parking, prior to the conservation easement being put in place.
I think the difference between someone who's parked in their car and on a business call versus having a business come and solicit customers to conduct business right there is different. I think you can't control if somebody's on a business call and in the parking lot versus, having an actual solicitation of a business with people coming to conduct commerce.
There's a 80-foot easement for Red Rocks Drive. So 40 foot from the center line to center line. So what says that the little peacock wasn't I didn't go down and look and see what was going on down there. But if they were sitting on the shoulder of the road and people were parking in the parking lot, then really the little peacock wouldn't have been on the easement at that point.
Yeah, I think if you want to allow people to park on the roads in Perry Park and to have a, food truck business on the roads, that's not an issue. But to the extent that the food trucks are, that's the issue.
I mean, we have vehicles park on all the roads out here. We don't have any other place for them to park and so forth. So we don't have sidewalks. We just have the road, and we have the shoulder of the road. The shoulder of the road in most cases, except for up there by the frontage, is only 3 or 4 foot wide. So if you pull off onto the shoulder of the road, you're still on the roadway. That is the only, or one of the few places that you can pull off the shoulder of the road completely, or onto the shoulder of the road, and still not be on the road itself.
You said something about the conservation easement and then the agreements over time, and this one is a 20-year-old agreement, right? So is there an established process for just reviewing that and sitting down and kind of looking over all the elements of that to say, okay, is that because to your point, I mean, things change over time. The consequence of the way, I mean, this whole neighborhood's changed quite a bit in 20 years. So I think I'm curious if there's a mechanism or approach that you already have in place or would prefer for that type of review, where we could just kind of review the easement top to bottom, make sure everything's still in alignment and we're agreed on all those elements, or how we're defining those elements, much like this one piece around the commercial aspects. I think there's other parts. There's actually one specific call out about the parking lot in there as well. So I was just curious.
So I think the issue, I mean, yes, so there's an amendment policy that DLC has, if Patty hasn't sent it to you, I'm sure to send it to you. And because, CPW is involved, they would have to weigh in. But there's no reason why, we can't talk about the conservation easement and what makes sense. I think the problem is, what I'm hearing is that you probably want to make it less restrictive, which is the part we have to be very careful about.
Oh, and I totally agree. I'm not pushing any particular position here. As far as what I'm just asking is, we've got a 20-year-old document, and so should we just reevaluate the agreement, or should there be some mechanism in place where it gets reevaluated on a 5-year basis or something like that, or 10-year basis or something?
So the way we set this, the way this easement was set up, and I can't remember if I was involved or not. I worked for the county at the time, and so I might have on behalf of the county. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. But I think that this is set up with a land management plan, and the concept was that the land management plan would be changed and adopted and refined very freely over time, but that the actual conservation easement itself would be amended, in a very, it's not kind of contemplated that it be amended from time to time. The idea is to instead amend the land management plan, which can be more flexible and doesn't have to be as rigid, because it's a document that isn't recorded. So that uses, to the extent uses are allowed under the conservation easement, they can be refined, discussed, different management can be brought in under the land management plan.
And so I know that we only put in our first land management plan last year on this. I do know that. So we never did, as a Metro district, get that in until after we did the gateway cleanup. So
gotcha. Okay.
So that is in there. I think we do have one. So
yeah, and it's and typically, all conservation easements are written differently. I've written them a lot of different ways, but it's kind of envisioned that every year during the monitoring visit, you can talk to that's the time to kind of sit down and talk about, okay, what are your plans for the upcoming year? How is everything working? What are some of your goals for the property? And that at that time you could negotiate anything you want in the land management plan that might be different, and leave the conservation easement alone, except to the extent there's something major that needs to be addressed. So I just throw that out there because it's possible that some of the things that you want to talk about could be covered just by the land management plan. It wouldn't have to be covered by the conservation easement. I'm not sure, but.
No, that's really helpful. I think that to know that that's a more specific implementation guidelines of the conservation easement, and therefore where we can get more detailed with these types of conversations.
Yes.
Okay.
However, keep in mind that the land management plan always has to be consistent with the terms of the conservation easement. And so
Of course.
we do have to follow that very closely.
Okay. Okay. I think that answers most of my questions on that front.
Okay.
I had a couple other questions. I just actually wanted just to make sure we're providing some awareness. But before I did that, how's everybody else on this? I saw Joe joined us.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I was a little bit late. My big concern is if we're going to have to start paying for water, what happens if we?
That's
have
what I wanted to go
drain that
next.
pond?
That's exactly where I wanted to go next. There, Joe, is because I think that's the conversation we really want to have. Like, this is good. We're having the conversation about the parking lot, but I don't know how aware you are of what's going on with our water situation and water rights. But I think we'd love to get your opinion and feedback on what we think are limited to diminishing options here. So, Joe, did you want to take that one since you've got that out in front of you?
Well, Randy's the guy that knows the most, but
That's always Randy. That's true.
but I will throw my 2 cents in is that we're, as the treasurer, we're getting, we do not have the water rights. We do not have the right to hold that water in that pond.
Yeah.
And we're going to be faced with two choices: either drain it and allow the water to continue to flow downstream in the future, or we have to pay to put water back in there. So meaning we lease water and put water into that pond and pump it in there every so often.
Mm-hmm.
And if we end up having to drain it, what are the issues that the DLC is going to have with that?
Do you want to try that first, Patty, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Melinda, that's fine.
Okay. So, that's obviously a condition that nobody envisioned at the time that they put the easement on the property. So, and things like that happen from time to time. So we could, through the land management plan, come up with an alternative plan for how that land would be used. Just in general, off the top of my head, without consulting anyone on our stewardship committee, which is not really the best thing for me to do, but I would envision that we just reseed it and revegetate it and allow it to be a natural area.
And because conservation easement protects Preble's meadow jumping mouse habitat, it may need to be that if the pond is drained and has to be revegetated, that you consult with Colorado Parks and Wildlife as to what the best seed mix is and native plant communities are to plant in that area to enhance the habitat that's protected by the conservation easement.
I think that's important. Your position is that the water is actually not necessary to preserve as part of the wild, or the as far as the conservation and the easement there itself. You're not seeing that as a necessary component of that.
Yeah, no, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Patty, and I have to pull it up, but I think that the conservation easement doesn't require the water rights to be kept with the property. Let me look.
I'm sorry, I don't mean specifically about the water rights. I guess
with
making sure that the water is part of the ecosystem. You're not seeing that as a necessary component to keeping.
No.
And then I don't know how much of this is you versus the Department of Wildlife would make some of those determinations.
Yeah, exactly. CPW may have a totally different opinion about it, but in terms of DOC's view of this, because the water rights were not protected as part of the conservation easement, they don't have to be kept with the property. Now, obviously you didn't own them, so that probably had something to do. The district didn't own the water rights at the time the easement was granted. But we wouldn't take the position, and Patty, I don't know if you've talked to stewardship committee about this, but I don't think we would take the position that you have to go out and purchase water to add to this. Now, CPW may say, because you've already got correct me if I'm wrong, but there's already the creek running through there. Is it a creek? Still creek, yeah. Right? You've got the creek running through there, so you're still going to have a drainage way that would support Preble's meadow jumping mice.
And I think that's where it gets interesting. I think because we and I don't know the specifics of this. That's where Randy and Craig really, I think, have a better grasp on this. But I think that even if we drain it to make sure that that would flow naturally, I think there's some work we have to do to allow that to happen and take a spillway out and some other things. So I don't know. But I think there's additional work there too, which may or may not disturb the conservation easement. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that would all have to be handled in the land management plan to say, okay, this is the same way with the pond, right?
okay.
The work that needs to be done, and temporary impacts to move towards something more permanent is something that we can usually, accommodate without any trouble. I think, CPW would obviously have to be involved with regard to what kind of seed mix, as Patty said, and what kind of vegetation they'd want around the ditch area to try to promote pebbles. But the conservation values, there's still going to be wildlife habitat, whether it's a pond or whether it's revegetated. I'm sure that the wildlife are hanging out there regardless.
Right.
It might look a little different, but we're talking about perpetuity here. So we can work with you on what makes sense long-term, as long as we're doing the best we can for the conservation values, understanding the circumstances that you're in with water rights.
Got it.
Well,
Do you disagree with any of that, Patty? I mean, that's.
No, I agree.
Cool.
yeah, I think as much invasion as we've had of the plant life already, I foresee somewhere down the road that there won't be a pond there anyway. It will eventually silt in totally, and those cattails are going to take over, and it's just going to be a wetlands, which is what has happened on the rest of the easement, is that it's become a wetlands rather than a pond. And I just think that'll happen. I don't know if it's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years, but it will happen eventually. I mean,
Is there a
that's
lot of
nature.
drainage? Is there a lot of drainage that drains into that area naturally? So if you took out the pond, would there still be drainage coming in that might still suggest wetlands could be there?
Yeah, that the above, we have haystack and we have sandstone. The watersheds that have come into that creek, that form that creek, coming off the mountain and everything, come down through there. They do. Everything is silt. Where the cattails are right now is pretty much silt, and that's why the cattails are there. And if we hadn't went in to do the dredging last year, then the last few square feet of that pond would have filled in probably within a 5-year period. And we've dug it to 5 foot deep, but it's going to silt in again.
Right.
You would have to do something like that every so often.
So when you did the work on the pond, refresh my memory if you don't mind, did you have to get a permit from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because of the Prebbles mouse?
Yeah, we had to make sure that we didn't dig during the time that the mouse was active. So we dug when the mouse was supposedly in hibernation or whatever. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So probably the same kind of thing, regardless of what the outcome is. You just have to.
Oh yeah.
The Wildlife Service would weigh in on it. I mean, it might be a good opportunity to have a long-term solution for the property. If you do end up having to not wanting to purchase water rights, come up with something from it with both Fish and Wildlife Service and CPW that would make the most sense from a wildlife standpoint.
I could jump in here for a second. There's a number of things that we need to do precursor to any decision processes on this. Number one, we do have a water rights attorney on board. We do have a water engineer on board.
Right.
We're waiting to get some more information back on some of our options from them. So what we can do legally to satisfy the State Water Board, we'll need to get those better defined than where we're at the moment in a little bit more detail. The options are essentially allow all the water to go through, eliminate a pond because we do not have any water rights, nor do we have any storage rights there in that area. Now, the other thing, or lease or purchase water rights that would allow us to and pursue in court, water court storage rights to keep that pond. So what we need to do is find out all the details of that, and then cost. Option A, option B, what type of cost factors are going to be involved with this. And then if it were to, I think the preference at this point with the discussions we've had on the board and that board members have had with the public is that the amenity of the pond is kind of a key thing in our community. And I think most people view that as a very desirable amenity, not to mention all the wildlife values. And, you know, you have a whole different ecosystem with an open water pond than you would just wetlands. So there's,
Absolutely.
There's species, all kinds of things coming into that. And just the beauty of it when you drive by and the ponds reflecting the mountains and all that good stuff. So I think the community is, from what we've determined, is on board with trying to keep that. The other thing we have to look at is the expense. And we have yet to determine if water is available for us to lease or purchase to put back in there, and under what conditions and pricing that would be. I suspect there could be an OMG surprise factor with part of that equation, but yet to be determined.
Right.
So if the pricing was such, from a leasing standpoint, not only the price of the water that we would lease, but what is the term that we could lease it? In other words, is it a 5-year thing, a 10-year thing, an in perpetuity type situation? And will the cost stay the same over time? So we have to look ahead at what other boards might be faced with as far as long-term obligations, what the community would be faced with, the long-term obligation to the water, or is the whole thing up in the air again in 5 years or 10 years? So those are factors that come into play. If it were to be determined through this more detailed analysis and essentially with the pricing component, that it would be in the best interest of the community long-term to eliminate the pond and have it go straight through, well, there's a whole bunch of legal issues that we need to explore there. And some of those legal issues are going to be surrounding the mouse. So now we've basically taken habitat away that existed. I don't know what kind of a position that puts us in legally and with who, besides Division of Wildlife. There could be other agencies, both federal and state, that may have an interest in that. So all those things need to be pursued. And then we have to look at the cost of all that. Let's say we can drain the pond, but there's certain mitigation measures that we need to put in place for the mouse. What are those? How extensive are they? What are the costs of them? So this issue with the pond, I think, has a lot of not necessarily complicated components, but just in-depth components. A lot of things that we as a community, from both a community benefit and a financial responsibility standpoint, need to take a look at. So we're kind of a long ways away from what we can do on that right now, but we have a short time frame to get this done. We're basically looking at July 1st is what we have from the State Water Board to get this accomplished. So we are doing our due diligence in the interim to try to meet that time frame. So that's my thoughts on the pond anyway.
I'm sure DLC can work with you, whatever you end up deciding to do. And the interest that DLC will have is just what's in the best interest of the conservation values. Once you've decided pond or no pond, what's the best situation that can be provided? I mean, I think, Patty, that's fair to say, right? I don't think anybody is going to suggest it's a violation of the easement for you to get rid of the pond under the circumstances and the way the easement's drafted.
No, our stewardship committee and our board fully understand the conservation easement and what it's trying to protect. And so I think working with the Metro District the best way possible to protect those conservation values is of the utmost importance rather than the body of water itself.
The board or Kurt, anybody else have any comments on the water issue with the pond?
I think that answers my questions.
Okay, very good.
Joe,
I'd like to
do you have
throw a
something?
couple of things into this conversation past the water issue. The other one would be, we've talked now for several years about redoing the entryway at the gateway on either side of Red Rock. Right now we have a stone monument on each side with a Perry Park Ranch and a Perry Park Country Club stone thing. Those are kind of both in, part of it is in county right of way and part of it is within conservation easement. So as we move forward, whether it's this year or moving into next year, with a potential redesign of the front entryway area, I guess asking what we can and can't do, my personal vision of that area would be not real different than what you see there now. I kind of think that the monuments need to be moved back a little ways. There is some site triangle issue there that people tend to pull out a little too far. And if you're turning in when somebody's pulled way out, it's not real convenient. So I think we could enhance the safety components with that intersection with a redesign of the aesthetic amenity that we have there. My personal vision would be something like bringing in large natural rocks and creating kind of maybe an artificial formation on each side, not necessarily a mirror image of each other, allowing a place for the current sandstone signs that talk about the country club and the Metro District or the Perry Park Ranch to make sure those still get displayed. Appropriate plantings and appropriate lighting. The other thing would be to kind of clean up the cluster that we have in that area with electrical. We have a lot of electrical overhead wires that I think could be brought underground and would certainly, from an aesthetic component, be a plus to that area. So if we were to do something in a natural basis, like adding some large specimen moss rocks and using those to create little planting beds for flowers, perennial, possibly annual, also some shrubs, and probably keeping the plant material that actually could be utilized as an education component, utilizing native species in there, and then having some little signage off to the side that would explain to people what's in there and why it was chosen from a water conservation standpoint, from a fire resistance standpoint, from just the benefits of incorporating native species into your landscapes, to extend that on a personal level for people in the park. Is that something that the conservation, that you guys would be okay with?
So I'll speak really quickly to what the conservation easement says, and then I'll let Patty speak to the rest. Is that okay, Patty?
Sure.
Conservation easement basically says that the entry area, the entry monumentation can be repaired and maintained. It can also be, I think it says replaced also. Yeah, it can be replaced in its current location or another location approved by DLC. But the footprint or the height of it will be substantially enlarged. That also has to be approved by DLC. Mm-hmm. So I think, it would just be a request that would go to our stewardship committee, and we could work with you to accommodate what you're looking at. It sounds beautiful.
Okay, well, very good. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for where we as a board would have to go when we start moving in that direction with that project. So appreciate that.
Yeah, Patty, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly right. And so any proposal like that, just, first and foremost, I always suggest, that the Metro District, when you're contemplating anything like that, look at the stewardship and management plan and then look at the conservation easement. And ask those questions, even if it is something that you're not sure about whether it needs our approval or not. It's just better to ask us first, to find out what the proper process is and if we need our approval to do anything such as this.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that. And then one last thing for me, I'd like to play devil's advocate a little bit here. And I know there's been some talk amongst board members of the little parking area that we originated this whole discussion with, and allowances of what we can do on property and all those sort of things. I guess the concept came up of what environmental value does that little parking area have? And is it something that truly needs to be under a conservation easement? Obviously, it is not habitat for the primary component that we have this, and that's the Preble's jumping mouse. It's not nesting grounds for everything because it would all get run over if it were. There's just zero value from a wildlife and an environmental standpoint of that little parking area. So the devil's advocate part of me says, can that little piece of ground be cut out of the conservation easement? And if it could, what would it take to do that?
So there's a state statute that just got amended with COVID, I always forget timelines, but I believe it was July of 2019. That requires the only way you can eliminate a conservation easement is to find that there are no conservation values at all, and for both parties, the landowner and the land trust, to go to court and have the court confirm that there are no conservation values, and then the easement can be terminated. So I think, that obviously I don't know what DLC's position would be about taking a piece of the easement and terminating the easement. But if that's something DLC was interested in allowing, and agreed that there were no conservation values there, then it would have to go to court, and the court would have to confirm and agree that there's no conservation values, and then they could grant that request.
However, the conservation easement in the state that it's in right now prohibits any subdivision of the property. So you could not amend the easement to carve out the parking area and eliminate.
It would have to be a termination. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Well, I mean, that might be a consideration, just to allow greater flexibility in the use of that tiny little area, and
so Randy,
I would put it that way.
The original intent of the conservation easement, as I understand it, and covering the parking lot with the conservation easement as well, was the interest of the residents of Perry Park not ever having the ability, or not ever allowing someone the ability to put any kind of commercial use on that parking area, such as a gas station or 7-Eleven, something like that. And then also by having the ability, or having that not be in the conservation easement, having the ability to construct something like that, it does pose an impact to the conservation values on the property adjacent to that by any types of gas or fuel runoff or something like that, or any kind of chemicals or things like that could go into that wetland area that could impact the conservation values. And so there was kind of twofold with the original intent. One, to prohibit any type of commercial development to happen at the entry of Perry Park, because that's what the residents wanted. Two, any impact or any commercial activity that was allowed adjacent to this conservation area could have a negative impact on that conservation area. And our board, or our stewardship committee, has actually talked about, allowing commercial uses in that parking area, or if that portion of the easement was terminated in some way, the allowed uses could potentially have a detrimental impact to the conservation values on the rest of the conservation property.
Yeah, I would think that it would be very, very important, if that type of action were to be pursued, that right up front, there would be a lot of conversation with you folks and our board. And then what status would that little parking lot, that little piece of Metro District owned property fall into? And I think that could be done up front, where it's still remains something like an open space property, and the uses can be defined for that area within the parameters of the Metropolitan District Authority. And then that would be incorporated into any exclusion of that little teeny piece of ground from the conservation easement. So I'm not saying that I personally feel that I would prefer to go that way, but I think we need to explore all options on this, and I think that's an option that may need to get looked at if it's a possibility at all. If the board were to decide to go that direction, my personal preference would be to guide it in such a way that all the things that you just mentioned, Patty, would not be impacted by that. And so there would be rules and regulations set right up front as part of an exclusion process that would be part of what that little piece of ground needs to maintain into perpetuity.
And also, Randy, keep in mind that this was a piece of property that was purchased in coordination with the Metro District, the Division of Wildlife, and Douglas County as funding partners for the purchase of the property. So any type of termination of the conservation easement would also have to be approved by Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the county as well, because they have a vested interest in this financially.
Correct, and I would fully envision that there would be a reparation buyout, as it were, to achieve that goal. So yes, because there were multiple partners involved in the purchase of all that, I think it would be a relatively easy math to figure out just what that little piece of property is worth to all the different partners. And that would have
I think it would be a bigger valuation than that, because they will also evaluate the impact of the conservation area outside of that area that terminates. So that would be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, I think the problem is that to the extent there's any impact to the rest of the conservation easement, I don't know how DLC could say there's no conservation values left, right? So, which is the standard under the statute. So it's tricky. It seems it would be, I can't imagine, I don't know, I can't say for certain, but it's hard to imagine a scenario based on what Patty just said where DLC would feel comfortable saying there are no conservation values, because obviously if it's the corner where the parking lot is located, then the scenic value of the rest of the conservation property would be negatively impacted by allowing anything to go on that area other than a parking lot. So
you have to take into consideration that there's more than one conservation value of wildlife habitat. It's protected for the scenic views off of 105 looking onto the property, and also the open space and recreational aspect of the property. So you have to be able to demonstrate that none of those conservation values are any longer on that property in order to terminate that conservation easement.
Very good. Yeah, just looking at this big picture and seeing what type of things would have to take place to even move in a direction like that.
Standard is intended to be set really, really high in the statute for being able to do that. I think, have you ever thought about just reclaiming the parking lot and revegetating the parking lot so that it's not tempting for it to be used by?
That's what Craig was about to say. Yep.
Yeah.
And it has been discussed also. Yeah.
Yep.
That's another real option.
And I guess the last thing, and I know Patty, we kind of talked about this when we had met before, was the ability to put some type of a posting cable or low visual impact barrier just outside of the county right away along the whole pond frontage to keep vehicles from driving down to the pond edge as that has been increasingly more of a problem where we drive by and see vehicles parked right down there. Some of those soils are really wet soils, so when they drive down there, they leave pretty substantial evidence of the fact that they were there. And we would view that as kind of an ongoing maintenance issue. It's very, very difficult to get some things to grow there. I've got a few thoughts I'd like to throw out to the board about what we can do to that area. And I would almost view some of that as kind of a mini pothole prairie environment. And we have some native species that may do well in there and enhance the whole concept of what that pond's about. So anyway, with regards to the barrier itself, any concerns that you guys would have about putting that in there?
So in looking at the conservation easement under the fencing language, fencing is allowed to separate ownership, you know, to control issues such as this that you're experiencing. However, they do have to follow what CPW's guidelines are or suggestions are for fencing to promote the movement of wildlife. And I know it's right along the road and you're probably not experiencing a lot of wildlife movement there. CPW does have guidelines on all kinds of different types of fencing. And I think what you're proposing in post and cable and things like that are some of those that are consistent with that. And so it's very easy to look up, you know, what CPW's guidelines are for wildlife friendly fencing and see if there are options that would fit that. But I think that, you know, if that's the route that you choose to go to try to keep people off of that area close to the pond, then, you know, I think that we fully support that.
Yeah, the other option would be posting a sniper down there at a 24/7 location. However, that would get really expensive over time and probably not endear us.
Not entirely legal.
Yeah,
I'm sure-
I'm not your attorney, but there might be some liability issues associated.
I'm thinking, yeah.
And don't put that on social media because people might take it upon themselves to do that.
Oh yeah, no.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to go there.
Patty, you've seen it all, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Thank you.
Sarcasm is not necessarily interpreted in today's world the way it's meant to be. So
It's a
my
lost art.
apologies for that.
No, I got it.
Just to tell the rest of the Metro board members, I did get another bid. It finally came in from another fence company. They're a little bit cheaper on putting in what you're suggesting, the post and cable type situation. And they did figure it all the way across so that we could take the parking lot and change it and keep it from being a parking lot anymore. So
If we wanted to do that. Cool.
yeah, we have, I mean, we have a little park there already. So at the front of the park, and if we do the front entrance and don't have a parking lot, I don't know any place where they have a parking lot right at the front entrance of their housing development. And it just encourages people on 105 to pull off there, and especially semi trucks and other commercial trucks pulling in there all the time.
Right.
And like I said, I've called the sheriff a couple times to have them remove vehicles out of there, and it's a problem. You know, we even have a sign there that says it's temporary parking, no overnight parking, and people do it. And it's mainly
Are your residents using that parking lot very often?
well, I think the residents go off to use their telephones a lot. But as long as we've got a 40-foot easement from the center line over for the shoulder of the road, they can still have plenty of room all the way across the front on either side of the road, all the way up. So I don't think that would be a big problem. I just think if we didn't have the parking lot, it wouldn't encourage a lot of other people to come along there.
Yeah.
I just know that the county experienced when the rest stops on I-25 agreement were removed years ago, the county experienced a lot of problems along Highway 105 and in all of the county open spaces. All of those people that would go to those rev stops ended up going to those parking areas at open space.
Right.
Perry Park as well, causing a lot of issues with the parks and other things that were going on that, you know, really impacted the residents along that area. And so I would imagine, with the exception of those using their cell phones and those that want to enjoy the Gateway property, the majority of those people that park there have no business, you know, in that community.
Exactly. I would agree with you, Patty. It's, from what I've seen up
Time
there.
as traffic becomes worse and worse, you know, with the GAP project, you're already experiencing that. You know, I think it may pose more and more of a problem trying to manage that. Even you don't have the ability to do so, and the county may not have the means to do so for you. So, you know, something to take into consideration.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I think it's an attractive nuisance is what I think. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a good counter argument for our ongoing conversation here.
Yeah.
But I did want to, I know we only got a couple minutes left. I only have a couple minutes left. So I just wanted to ask real quick, is there, first of all, thank you for all the feedback and all the insight. It was really helpful for me. I've not really had the chance to meet with you and have this conversation before. So thank you very much. But I also wanted to see, is there any particular feedback or information you wanted that you felt you need to share with us as a board based off of what we're doing, how we've been working the last couple of years? Anything else in particular you think would be worth talking about real quick?
No, I just want to thank you all for being so proactive over the last several years in, you know, working through all the different situations and issues. It's always really hard when we're working with, you know, typically a private landowner or a governmental entity that has a conservation easement, that the ownership doesn't change, or the person that, you know, you have the main contact for doesn't change. In these situations where you have a metro district where the management company or the board changes, it's always a big challenge for us to continue to educate that board and or that management company about the conservation easement on certain portions of the property that are owned by that entity. And so I really appreciate all of you and your interest in understanding that, because it is a big learning curve, and you're not used to something like a perpetual legal document like this.
Right.
Very confusing and sometimes frustrating. And that's why we want to be as transparent as possible and say, you know, call us up, you know, call me up anytime you have a question. Right. And, you know, we need an interpretation of the easement, or are we supposed to be updating this management plan? And the reason the stewardship plan hasn't been revisited, you know, for such a long time is, you know, that's the landowner's responsibility. And, you know, if we aren't hearing from the landowner, we assume that there are no changes to that stewardship plan. So in this situation, again, as you transition into different board members, it's hard to keep that in the loop. And so, you know, putting it out on your website like you have right now and making that maybe part of your orientation for new board members, I think is really important, so they fully understand that. And then fully understanding, you know, the difference between Douglas Land Conservancy and the county. You know, we're two different entities.
Right.
I think that people get confused about that. Perry Park Gateway is really confusing because we co-held the conservation easement with the county at one point in time, and the county transferred their interest to us. So we're the sole holder of the conservation easement now. So, you know, making sure that if you don't understand that, we can help you understand that. And you guys have been great about that. And so, you know, we appreciate that. And we hope that we can have that good relationship going forward and help you, help the community understand what your obligations are and responsibilities, and what our obligations and responsibilities are.
Great. Thank you. All right. You're on mute, right, Randy?
Talking to myself again, that happens quite a bit these days. So we're about out of time. Is that correct, Kurt?
Yes, sir.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the cause, good of the world here?
Nope.
Well, seeing none, I would suggest that we adjourn this meeting, and thanks everybody that's in attendance from the Douglas Land Conservancy and Metropolitan District, and we have a number of citizens that have also jumped in, and that is certainly appreciated by us. To have that community involvement, I think, is a good key to success over time. So with
Yeah.
that, do we need a motion to close up?
Oh, sir.
No,
Craig, you have something else?
Do any of the citizens have any questions that we haven't addressed?
This is Bonnie Schwam. I think as far as I know, Patty from LDC or something, I think I've talked with you before, but I thought it was really informative. And I think that there's a lot of decisions that have to be made for sure. And I think that will take like that. I hope that we get more people to put their input in as to what they want to see. But it seems like there's a lot of big decisions. I like the water there, but it may not be the best use. So, but I appreciate you guys telling us, educating us about what's going on. So thank you, Melinda and Patty.
Thank you.
It was wonderful to meet everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll end the meeting. Y'all take care.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 thank you. Bye.